The twin suns of Havre's Reach blazed mercilessly overhead, turning the colony's central square into a furnace. Rodney Vance squinted against the harsh light, feeling sweat trickle down his back beneath the stiff, formal uniform they'd made him wear for the ceremony. The fabric clung uncomfortably to his skin as he stood at attention, listening to Commander Bren Axton drone on about heroism and sacrifice. Around him, the settlement sprawled out in concentric rings of prefabricated structures, dust-covered and weathered by the planet's punishing environment. Havre's Reach was the definition of a frontier colony. Harsh, unforgiving, and populated by those with nowhere else to go or those seeking to escape something. For Rodney, it had been both. And so, Commander Axton's voice boomed over the crowd gathered in the square. We honor Rodney Vance today, not just with this Medal of Valor, but with something truly special. Rodney tensed. This wasn't part of what he'd been told would happen. The medal was expected, standard protocol for saving 37 miners during the collapse of Shaft 9 last month. He'd just been doing his job as security detail, nothing more. The recognition made him uncomfortable. The memories of that day were still too raw. Axton gestured to his right, and two guards stepped forward, dragging between them what appeared to be a large cage covered with a heavy tarp. The crowd murmured with interest. For exemplary service and unparalleled bravery, Axton continued, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, the colonial administration has decided to bestow upon you a rare gift. With a dramatic flourish, he yanked away the tarp. Rodney's blood ran cold. Inside the cage was a humanoid figure, female in appearance, huddled in a corner. Her skin was a luminous shade of indigo that seemed to pulse slightly with each rapid breath she took. Large, almond-shaped eyes the color of amber stared out from a delicate face framed by what appeared to be tendrils rather than hair. Fine, iridescent filaments that shifted color with her movements. Around her neck was a heavy metal collar with blinking indicators. A Valari. Rodney had heard of them. A spacefaring race from the outer systems whose home planet had been devastated during the Syndicate Wars. Now they were rare, considered exotic, and apparently considered property. A pure-blooded Valari female, Axton announced proudly, as if presenting a prize racehorse. Healthy, properly trained, and now legally yours. The perfect companion for a bachelor hero. He winked, drawing chuckles from some in the crowd. Rodney felt sick. He stared into those amber eyes and saw no training or submission, only raw fear beneath a veneer of defiance. The Valari woman clutched something small and metallic that hung from her neck, her knuckles pale blue against her darker skin. "Commander," Rodney began, his voice tight, "I appreciate the gesture, but—" "Nonsense." Axton clapped him on the shoulder. "These creatures fetch a high price on the core worlds. Consider it an investment." He lowered his voice, though still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "And I've heard they're quite adaptable to their owner's needs." Something snapped inside Rodney. Perhaps it was the memories of his parents, researchers who had died defending innocent civilians during a Syndicate raid. Perhaps it was the faces of the miners he'd failed to save in Shaft 9, haunting his dreams. Or maybe it was just the fundamental wrongness of seeing a sentient being in a cage. Without thinking, Rodney stepped forward, reaching for the locking mechanism of the cage. "Vance? What are you doing?" Axton's voice hardened. Rodney didn't answer. His fingers worked quickly on the electronic lock, muscle memory from his military days coming back as he bypassed the simple security measure. "Stop him!" Axton barked, but the command came too late. The cage door swung open. For a breathless moment, the Valari woman remained motionless, as if disbelieving. Then her amber eyes locked with Rodney's, and some unspoken understanding passed between them. "Come on," Rodney urged quietly, extending his hand. In one fluid motion, she sprang forward, not to escape, but to throw her arms around Rodney in what could only be described as a desperate embrace. He could feel her trembling against him, her skin strangely cool despite the heat. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some people shouted in outrage, others in support. Guards drew weapons, uncertain whether to aim at Rodney, the Valari, or the increasingly unruly crowd. "This is treason, Vance," Axton roared, his face contorted with rage. "That property is worth more than you'll earn in a decade." "She's not property," Rodney replied, instinctively positioning himself between the Valari and the guards. "And I'm declining your gift." Axton's eyes narrowed. "Take them both," he ordered the guards. The alien goes back in the cage, and Vance goes to detention until he regains his senses. Guard began closing in from all sides. The Valari tensed beside Rodney, her embrace becoming a grip of fear. Making a split-second decision, Rodney grabbed her hand. "Run," he hissed, and together they burst through the thin line of guards, catching them by surprise. They sprinted through the stunned crowd, which parted reflexively. Rodney headed straight for the maintenance yard at the edge of the settlement, where his old mule, a battered but reliable terrain vehicle from his military days, was parked. "Stop them!" Axton's voice echoed across the square, followed by the distinctive sound of pulse rifles charging. Rodney practically threw the Valari woman into the passenger seat of the mule before jumping in himself. The engine roared to life on the third try, just as the first energy bolts sizzled past them, scorching the ground. With a lurch, the vehicle shot forward, kicking up a cloud of dust as they crashed through the settlement's flimsy perimeter fence and out into the vast, unforgiving desert of Havers Reach. As they sped away, Rodney caught a glimpse of Axton's face in the rearview mirror, a mask of pure hatred that promised this was only the beginning. The ancient mule groaned as Rodney pushed it to its limits, racing across the barren landscape. The vehicle's suspension system, designed for military operations decades ago, struggled with the rugged terrain, sending jarring impacts through the frame with each ridge and crevice they crossed. Beside him, the Valari woman gripped the seat, her entire body tense as she stared straight ahead. The heavy collar around her neck glinted in the harsh sunlight, its indicator lights still blinking steadily. Once they put several miles between themselves and the settlement, Rodney eased off the accelerator, allowing the overheated engine a reprieve. Dust swirled around them as the mule slowed to a more sustainable pace. "Let me see that collar," he said, gesturing toward her neck. She flinched away initially, her amber eyes wide with apprehension. "I won't hurt you," Rodney assured her, keeping his voice soft. "I want to get off." Hesitantly, she tilted her head, allowing him to examine the metal band. It was a standard restraint collar, nothing he hadn't seen before during his military service. The syndicate had used similar devices on prisoners, a thought that made his stomach turn. "Hold still," he instructed, retrieving a multi-tool from the mule's storage compartment. With careful precision, he located the collar's primary circuit and severed it. The indicator lights flickered and died, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. As the collar fell away, the Valari woman's hand flew to her throat, her fingers tracing the skin where the metal had been. A sound escaped her lips, something between a sob and a sigh of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice musical and accented but understandable. "Thank you." Rodney nodded, tossing the disabled collar out into the desert. "I'm Rodney Vance," he said, realizing they hadn't properly introduced themselves in the chaos of escape. She hesitated, then touched her chest lightly. "Sierra," she said. "In your language, closest would be Sierra." Sierra. The name suited her somehow. "Are you hurt?" Rodney asked, noticing dark bruising on her wrists and a thin cut along her jawline. Sierra shook her head slightly. "Not badly." Her fingers went to the pendant hanging around her neck, a small metallic object that seemed to emit a faint bluish glow. The raw wind picked up, carrying stinging particles of sand that peppered the vehicle's exterior. Rodney squinted at the horizon, evaluating their options. They couldn't return to the settlement. That much was certain. Axton would have already mobilized his security forces. "We need to find shelter before nightfall," he said, more to himself than to Sierra. "The temperature drops below freezing out here." As if on cue, the first of the twin suns began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. Rodney aimed the mule toward a distant ridge of rock formations, potential shelter from both the elements and pursuing forces. As they drove, memories crashed over him like waves, unwelcome and powerful. He saw again the frightened faces of the miners as the shaft collapsed around them, heard their screams echoing in the darkness. And further back, the day he'd found his parents' research station in ruins, syndicate raiders leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. His parents had died protecting a group of refugees, humans and aliens alike, from execution. They had taught him that all sentient life deserved dignity and freedom. He hadn't been able to save them. He hadn't been able to save all the miners. But today, maybe he could save Sierra. Your people, Sierra's soft voice broke through his thoughts. They treat Velari like animals. Rodney's jaw tightened. Not my people. Not all humans. He glanced at her. What happened to you? How did you end up here? Sierra's gaze dropped to her hands. Syndicate raiders attacked our settlement on Vega Prime. Many died, others taken. Her fingers twisted together as she spoke. I was sold several times. Last owner sold me to your military man, the angry one. Axton. Rodney spat the name. Yes, Axton. Sierra's voice hardened slightly. He said I was to be special gift. Training began. Her hand went unconsciously to one of the bruises on her arm. Fury rose in Rodney's chest, hot and choking. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. Sierra looked at him with those piercing amber eyes. Why you help me? Risk everything. The question hung between them as Rodney steered the mule into a narrow canyon, seeking the shelter of its walls as the first sun disappeared completely and the second began its final descent. Because it was right, he answered simply. Because he couldn't fail another innocent being. Because the look in her eyes reminded him of everything he'd been fighting for his entire life. Before Sierra could respond, a distant sound caught their attention, the distinctive whine of military-grade hover engines. Axton's forces were already on their trail. We need to move faster, Rodney muttered, pushing the mule harder as they delved deeper into the canyon shadows, racing against both their pursuers and the rapidly falling night. The temperature plummeted as the second sun vanished beyond the horizon. Within the shelter of the canyon, Rodney found a small alcove, a natural garage for the mule, hidden from aerial surveillance by an overhanging rock shelf. Once he'd shut down the vehicle's systems, silence descended, broken only by their breathing and the occasional shifting of cooling metal. In the dim emergency light of the mule's cabin, Sierra's skin seemed to emit a subtle bioluminescence, casting faint blue patterns across her face. We'll stay here tonight, Rodney decided, reaching behind the seats for his emergency pack. He always kept it stocked, a habit from his military days that had saved his life more than once. From it, he extracted a thermal blanket, which he handed to Sierra. Here, the nights get dangerously cold. She accepted it with a small nod, wrapping it around her shoulders. Your world, very harsh, she observed, looking out at the darkening landscape. This isn't my world, Rodney replied, rummaging further in the pack for ration bars. Just a place I ended up. He offered her one of the bars. It's not great, but it's food. Sierra took it cautiously, examining the wrapped bar before taking a small bite. She didn't comment on the taste, simply ate with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to hunger. As they ate, Rodney's mind raced through options. They couldn't outrun Axton's forces forever. Not in this terrain, not with the mule's limited fuel and supplies. They needed a destination, a plan beyond mere survival. There's an old evacuation station about 60 miles east of here, he said after a while. Built during the border conflicts, before this became an official colony. If the communication equipment is still operational, we might be able to contact someone off-world. Who would help? Sierra asked quietly. It was a fair question. Rodney had few allies these days. Most of his military contacts had moved on or died. Former friends had drifted away during his self-imposed exile on Haver's Reach. I know a few people who still owe me favors, he said, hoping it was true. Former resistance fighters, smugglers, people who don't ask questions. Sierra nodded slowly, her eyes studying his face as if searching for deception. After a moment, she reached for the pendant around her neck, holding it tightly in her palm. The faint glow intensified briefly as she closed her eyes. "What is that?" Rodney asked, curious. Sierra opened her eyes, looking down at the pendant. "Memory stone," she explained, "contains impressions of home, family." Her voice softened. "All lost now." Rodney recognized the grief in her voice, the same that had hollowed him out after finding his parents' bodies. "Not everything is lost," he said gently. "You're still here." Something shifted in Sierra's expression, the faintest ghost of what might one day become a smile. "Because of you." A sudden noise outside silenced them both, the sound of distant engines growing steadily louder. Rodney extinguished the emergency light, plunging them into darkness broken only by the subtle glow of Sierra's skin. "They're sweeping the area," he whispered, peering cautiously out of the alcove. In the distance, search beams cut through the night, methodically scanning the canyon floor. "We need to stay absolutely quiet." Sierra nodded, drawing the thermal blanket tighter around herself as they huddled in the mule's cabin, listening to the search party grow steadily closer. Hours passed in tense silence as the search patterns crisscrossed above and around them. Eventually, the sounds began to recede, the searchers moving on to other areas. Only then did Rodney allow himself to exhale fully. "Get some rest," he told Sierra. "I'll take first watch." She looked reluctant, but exhaustion clearly weighed on her. Curling into the passenger seat, Sierra clutched her pendant close to her chest and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had steadied into sleep. Rodney watched over her, his mind replaying the day's events. He had just made himself an enemy of the colonial administration, thrown away years of keeping his head down, all for a stranger. And yet, looking at Sierra's peaceful face in repose, he felt no regret, only a resolute certainty that he had finally done something his parents would be proud of. Morning arrived with brutal intensity as the twin suns breached the horizon simultaneously, turning the canyon into an oven within minutes. Rodney, who had eventually dozed off during his watch, awoke to find Sierra already alert, staring out at the desert landscape with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "The air vibrates differently here," she observed when she noticed he was awake. "Like music too high to hear." Rodney nodded, stretching out the stiffness in his muscles. "This planet has a unique electromagnetic field. Some people say it drives you mad if you stay too long." He managed a wry smile. "Might explain a few things about Axton." Sierra didn't return the smile, but her eyes softened slightly. "You slept. I watched." The simple statement touched Rodney. The fact that she had taken it upon herself to stand guard while he rested spoke of a trust forming between them, something fragile but real. "Thank you," he said, reaching for his water canteen and offering it to her first. "We should get moving while it's still relatively cool. The station is a full day's journey in the mule, and we'll need to avoid main routes." As Sierra sipped the water, Rodney checked the mule systems. The fuel cells were at 43%, enough to reach the evacuation station if they were careful and the terrain wasn't too difficult. Food was more concerning. They had only 4 ration bars between them. Once they'd eaten a meager breakfast, Rodney maneuvered the mule out of the alcove and back onto the canyon floor. The morning light revealed details missed in the previous evening's haste. Ancient petroglyphs carved into the rock walls, evidence of some long-vanished native species. "Your people are not first here," Sierra noted, studying the carvings as they passed. "Humans are rarely the first anywhere," Rodney replied, "just often the loudest." They emerged from the canyon into a vast salt flat that stretched toward the horizon, the crystalline surface reflecting the sunlight with blinding intensity. Rodney handed Sierra a pair of protective goggles from the emergency kit. "Keep these on," he warned. "The glare can cause permanent damage." The mule skimmed across the salt flat, leaving a plume of white dust in its wake. For a few hours, they traveled in relative peace, the monotonous landscape broken only by occasional rock formations jutting from the salt crust like the bones of prehistoric beasts. Sierra gradually became more talkative as the day progressed, asking questions about Earth, about Rodney's past, about how humans had spread across the galaxy. Her curiosity seemed bottomless, her intelligence evident in the thoughtful way she processed new information. In turn, Rodney learned more about the Valari, a species with deep connections to the electromagnetic spectrums, capable of sensing energies imperceptible to humans. Their homeworld, Valeria, had been known for its vast underwater cities and bioluminescent forests before syndicate bombing had rendered most of the planet uninhabitable. "Our people scattered," Sierra explained, a shadow crossing her face. "Some found new homes. Others, not so fortunate." Their conversation was abruptly cut short by a warning light on the mule's dashboard, proximity alerts flashing red. "Get down," Rodney hissed, immediately cutting speed and steering toward a cluster of rock formations ahead. Sierra ducked low in her seat as Rodney guided the vehicle into the shadow of the largest formation. Above them, a patrol skimmer roared past, its sensors sweeping the terrain below. "They're establishing a search grid," Rodney muttered, watching the skimmer's flight pattern. "Axton's not giving up." They remained hidden for nearly an hour, waiting for the patrol to move on. When they finally resumed their journey, Rodney kept the mule at a lower speed, sticking close to what little cover the landscape provided. The day grew increasingly brutal as both suns reached their zenith. The mule's cooling system struggled against the heat, warning lights flickering intermittently on the dashboard. Rodney distributed their water carefully, acutely aware that dehydration could kill them faster than Axton's patrols. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the edge of the salt flats, where the terrain transitioned to rocky badlands, a maze of wind-carved stone and deep ravines. Navigation became more challenging, requiring Rodney's complete concentration as he guided the mule through narrow passages and across unstable ground. "Are we still going right way?" Sierra asked after a particularly difficult crossing that had nearly toppled the vehicle. "Yes," Rodney confirmed, checking the ancient GPS unit. "The evacuation station is just beyond these badlands. We should reach it by nightfall." As if the planet itself opposed their progress, the wind began to pick up, carrying stinging particles of sand and salt. The sky darkened ominously to the west. Not the natural darkening of approaching night, but something more sinister. "Sandstorm," Rodney said grimly, recognizing the signs. "We need to find shelter now." The storm was advancing quickly, a towering wall of whirling sand that devoured the horizon. Rodney increased speed, scanning desperately for any suitable shelter as the first gusts of wind rocked the mule. Sierra suddenly pointed to their right. "There! Opening in rock." Rodney veered sharply, spotting what she had seen. A narrow crevice in a cliff face, just wide enough for the mule to fit through. He gunned the engine, racing against the approaching wall of sand. They slipped into the crevice with moments to spare, the storm howling at their heels like a living beast. The narrow passage opened into a small cavern, its walls smooth as if carved by ancient water flows. As they sat in the relative safety of the cave, listening to the storm rage outside, Sierra shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "What is it?" Rodney asked, noticing her unease. "Someone was here," she replied, her eyes scanning the cavern. "Recently." Rodney tensed, hand moving instinctively to the pulse pistol at his hip. "How do you know?" Sierra tapped her temple. "Baladi Sinsa." "Impressions. Energies left behind." She pointed to the back of the cave. There, following her direction, Rodney noticed what appeared to be a small campsite, the remnants of a fire, some discarded packaging. Someone had indeed used this cave as shelter, perhaps within the last few days. Miners, maybe, he suggested, examining the site more closely. Or prospectors. But as he sifted through the abandoned items, something caught his eye that sent a chill down his spine. A standard-issue colonial security ration wrapper. Axton's men had been here, and recently. "We can't stay long," Rodney decided, returning to the mule. "As soon as the storm passes, we move." Sierra nodded gravely, her eyes continuing to scan the cave as if reading invisible text on its walls. "They hunt us like animals," she said quietly. "They won't catch us," Rodney promised, though he knew all too well how difficult that promise might be to keep. The sandstorm raged for hours, filling the air with an unearthly howling as particles scoured the exterior of the cave. Rodney used the time to check the mule's systems and take inventory of their dwindling supplies. The fuel cells were now at 29%, cutting it close, but still enough to reach the evacuation station if they encountered no further obstacles. Sierra explored the cave cautiously, her fingertips occasionally brushing against the rock walls as if reading them. "This place very old," she commented. "Many have sheltered here." "It's a natural stopping point," Rodney agreed, "which means we shouldn't linger. Too obvious." As night fell and the storm finally began to subside, they prepared to move on. Rodney checked the exterior cameras before cautiously guiding the mule back out into the open air. The landscape had been transformed by the storm. Dunes shifted, landmarks buried, new obstacles created. They traveled in darkness, using only the mule's infrared guidance system to navigate. The Badlands gradually gave way to more even terrain, though still broken by sudden ravines and sharp rock formations that loomed like sentinels in the night. "How much further?" Sierra asked, her voice tired but steady. "Another few hours," Rodney replied, checking the GPS. "We're making good time." The words had barely left his mouth when a brilliant light suddenly illuminated the mule from above, blinding in its intensity. The thunderous sound of engines filled the air as a colonial security skimmer swooped down, hovering directly above them. "Rodney Vance!" Axton's voice boomed from the skimmer's external speakers. "Power down your vehicle immediately. This is your only warning." Rodney's response was to slam the accelerator, sending the mule lurching forward at maximum speed. The sudden movement caught the skimmer operators by surprise, giving them precious seconds of advantage. "Hold on," he shouted to Sierra as he veered sharply between rock formations, attempting to break the skimmer's line of sight. Energy bolts sizzled past them, striking the ground with explosive force. The mule shuddered with each near miss, systems protesting the abuse. "They're trying to disable the vehicle, not destroy it," Rodney realized aloud. "They want you alive." Sierra's face was grim in the flashing lights of the dashboard. "And you? I'm expendable." Understanding passed between them in that moment. Axton would happily see Rodney dead if it meant recapturing his valuable property. The chase intensified as two more skimmers joined the pursuit, their searchlights crisscrossing the terrain. Rodney pushed the mule beyond its design capabilities, taking increasingly desperate risks as he navigated through the treacherous landscape. A sudden ravine appeared before them, too wide to cross, too deep to descend safely. "We're trapped," Sierra whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Rodney's mind raced, evaluating options that grew more limited by the second. "Not yet," he said, spinning the mule to face their pursuers. "When I say run, you run. Head east. Keep the 3 bright stars on your left. The evacuation station is about 5 miles that way." Sierra stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot fight them alone." "I'm not going to fight them," Rodney replied, reaching into the storage compartment and retrieving a small device, a military-grade EMP grenade, illegal on colonial worlds. "I'm going to distract them." Before Sierra could protest further, he shoved the remaining ration bars and water canteen into a small pack and thrust it into her hands. "Go, now." For a heartbeat, Sierra hesitated, her amber eyes locked with his. Then, with fluid grace, she slipped from the mule and disappeared into the shadows between rock formations. Rodney turned back to face the approaching skimmers, the EMP grenade heavy in his hand. He waited until they were nearly upon him, close enough that their searchlights illuminated the inside of the mule's cabin, before activating the device and hurling it directly at the lead skimmer. The explosion was silent but devastating. A wave of electromagnetic energy pulsed outward, instantly disabling the skimmer's electrical systems. The hovering craft dropped like stones, crashing into the rocky terrain with satisfying force. Taking advantage of the confusion, Rodney abandoned the mule and sprinted in the opposite direction from Sierra's escape route, hoping to draw the inevitable ground pursuit away from her. He made it nearly half a mile before a pulse blast caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling onto the hard ground. Pain blossomed, hot and sharp, as he tried to regain his footing. "Not another step, Vance." Axton's voice came from behind him, tight with barely controlled rage. Slowly, Rodney turned to face the commander, who stood with a pulse rifle aimed directly at his chest. Behind him, a squad of security officers fanned out, weapons raised. "Where is the Valari?" Axton demanded. "Gone," Rodney replied simply, a sense of satisfaction warming him despite the pain in his leg. "Beyond your reach." Axton's face contorted with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That specimen was worth a fortune to the right buyer." "She's not a specimen," Rodney shot back. "She's a person, with a name, with a history, with rights." "Rights?" Axton laughed coldly. "You've been out in the Badlands too long, Vance. The Valari are classified as non-sentient exotics under colonial law. Property, not people. Then the law is wrong." Axton's expression darkened. "The law is what keeps colonies like this functioning. What gives us order?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Did your bleeding heart ever consider that the revenue from that Valari could have funded school expansions? Medical supplies? Don't pretend this was about the greater good," Rodney spat. "This was about profit and your ego." A muscle twitched in Axton's jaw. "Search the area," he barked to his men. "The Valari couldn't have gotten far. Use bioscanners. Set a perimeter." As the security officers dispersed to carry out their orders, Axton returned his attention to Rodney. "As for you, you've committed theft of colonial property, destruction of military equipment, and treason. The penalty is death." Rodney met his gaze steadily. "Then get it over with." Instead, Axton smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent a shiver down Rodney's spine. "No, I think not. Dead men tell no tales, but live ones can be made examples of." He gestured to two officers. "Restrain him. We'll take him back for public trial and execution. Let everyone see what happens to those who defy colonial authority." As rough hands seized him, Rodney focused on one consoling thought. Sierra was free, heading toward the evacuation station and potential safety. Whatever happened to him now, he had done what was right. The security officers bound Rodney's hands behind his back and forced him to his knees as Axton surveyed the area, directing the search pattern for Sierra. The wound in Rodney's leg throbbed painfully, blood soaking through his pant leg. "Sir," one of the officers jogged up to Axton. "We've picked up traces heading east. Definitely Valari biosignatures." Axton's face lit with predatory satisfaction. "Concentrate the search in that direction. I want that alien found before sunrise." Rodney kept his expression neutral despite the sinking feeling in his chest. Sierra was resourceful, but she was alone on an unfamiliar, hostile planet with Axton's forces closing in. "She won't let you take her alive," Rodney said, hoping to discourage the pursuit. "Valari would rather die than return to captivity." Axton glanced down at him with contempt. "Then we'll be extra careful with our prize." He tapped a control on his wrist communicator. "Team 2, deploys sonic incapacitators. I want her subdued, not harmed." As Axton turned away to coordinate the search, one of the guards roughly pulled Rodney to his feet. The sudden movement sent a wave of pain through his injured leg, nearly causing him to collapse again. "Keep him upright," Axton ordered without looking back. "We move out in 5 minutes. The transport will meet us at the eastern perimeter." Rodney's mind raced, seeking any possible means of escape. His hands were securely bound, his leg injured, and he was surrounded by armed guards. The odds looked bleak. A sudden commotion from the direction of the downed skimmers caught everyone's attention. Shouts of alarm were followed by the distinctive sound of energy weapons discharging. "What now?" Axton snarled, signaling for two of his men to investigate. Before they could take more than a few steps, a blinding blue light erupted from between the rock formations, accompanied by a high-pitched, keening sound that seemed to vibrate through Rodney's very bones. The guards around him dropped to their knees, clutching their heads in pain. Rodney felt it too, a disorienting pressure in his skull, but less intensely than the others. Through watering eyes, he saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Sierra, her skin glowing with an unearthly blue luminescence, her pendant held before her like a talisman. "Cover your ears," she shouted to Rodney, her voice somehow cutting through the keening noise. He awkwardly pressed his shoulders against his ears as best he could with his hands bound, watching in astonishment as Sierra approached. The security officers writhed on the ground, incapacitated by whatever energy she was projecting. Only Axton remained partially functional, struggling to raise his weapon despite the obvious pain contorting his features. "Kill her," he gasped to any of his men who might still be able to act. Sierra's free hand shot out toward Axton, and the blue glow intensified around her fingertips. The commander's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed unconscious to the ground. The keening sound faded as Sierra reached Rodney, her amber eyes wide with concern. "You're hurt," she said, quickly examining the wound on his leg. "I'll be fine," Rodney assured her, still stunned by what he had witnessed. "What did you just do?" "Valari defense," she explained tersely, working to free his hands. "Memory stone amplifies natural abilities. Cannot maintain long, drains life force." Indeed, she looked paler, her movements less fluid than before. The glow of her skin had dimmed, and her breathing was labored. "We must hurry," Sierra said, supporting Rodney as he struggled to his feet. "Others will come." "The station, how far?" "About 5 miles east," Rodney replied, wincing as he put weight on his injured leg. "But I don't think I can make it on foot." Sierra's gaze swept over the unconscious security officers before settling on Axton's prone form. "His communicator," she said, quickly retrieving the device from the commander's wrist. "Can track transport's location." Rodney nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. "If we can intercept their transport, we might still make it to the evacuation station." Together, they stumbled toward the rocky outcropping where Sierra had hidden. The security officers would remain incapacitated for at least an hour, according to Sierra, though Axton might recover sooner due to his partial resistance to the Valari defense mechanism. "How did you do that?" Rodney asked as they moved. "I thought Valari were peaceful." Sierra's expression darkened. "We were, before Syndicate came." She touched her pendant gently. "Memory stones hold more than memories. Hold essence, power, sacred knowledge." Her amber eyes met his, used only in greatest need. The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Rodney could see that using the power had taken a physical toll on Sierra. Her luminescence had faded to almost nothing, and she seemed to be fighting exhaustion with each step. Using Axton's communicator, they tracked the incoming transport to a small clearing half a mile away. The vehicle, a sturdy, all-terrain troop carrier, sat waiting, guarded by only 2 officers who appeared confused by the lack of communication from their commander. "I can create distraction," Sierra whispered, clutching her pendant. Rodney placed a hand over hers, stopping her. "No, you're too weak already." He assessed the situation, formulating a plan. "Let me handle this." Despite his injured leg, Rodney still had years of military training to draw upon. He circled around to approach the transport from behind, moving silently despite the pain shooting through his limb with each step. The first guard went down without a sound, caught in a chokehold that rendered him unconscious within seconds. The second turned just in time to receive a stunning blow to the solar plexus, followed by a precise strike to the temple that dropped him instantly. Rodney signaled to Sierra, who emerged from hiding and hurried to the transport. Together, they loaded the unconscious guards into a nearby storage compartment and secured it. "Can you drive this?" Sierra asked as they climbed into the transport's cabin. "I can drive anything," Rodney replied with grim confidence, activating the vehicle's systems. The transport rumbled to life, its engine far more powerful than the mule's. Rodney turned it eastward toward the evacuation station and what he hoped would be their salvation. As they drove, Sierra found a medical kit and set about treating Rodney's leg wound, cleaning it with antiseptic and applying a pressure bandage to stop the bleeding. Her touch was gentle but sure, evidence of skills developed during a life that had clearly known its share of injuries. "You should not have come back for me," she said quietly, securing the bandage. "Was foolish risk." "Probably," Rodney agreed, guiding the transport over the rough terrain. "But I couldn't leave you to face them alone." Sierra studied him with those penetrating amber eyes. "Why? Many humans would." Rodney thought about his parents, about their unwavering belief in the dignity of all sentient beings, about the miners he couldn't save, and the nightmares that had haunted him since. "Because someone once told me that what makes us truly human isn't our biology," he answered finally. "It's our capacity to recognize the worth in others, even when they're different from us." Sierra nodded slowly, as if comprehending something profound. "Your people who taught this, they are gone." "My parents," Rodney confirmed. "They died protecting refugees during a syndicate raid. They were researchers studying cooperative relations between species." "They would be proud," Sierra said simply, placing her hand briefly on his shoulder. "Of son who remembers lessons." The eastern horizon began to lighten as the first sun prepared to rise. According to the transport's navigation system, they were less than 2 miles from the evacuation station. Rodney increased their speed, aware that time was running short. By now, other security teams would have discovered their missing comrades and the stolen transport. The landscape changed subtly as they approached the evacuation station. Debris from the old border conflicts becoming more frequent, remnants of defensive barriers and abandoned equipment half buried in the sand. And then, as they crested a small rise, they saw it. The evacuation station, a squat, fortified structure partially collapsed on one side, its communication tower still standing despite years of exposure to the harsh environment. Rodney brought the transport to a halt at a safe distance, surveying the area for any signs of ambush or occupation. The station appeared deserted. No vehicles, no movement, no heat signatures on the transport's thermal imaging. "Looks clear," he said cautiously, "but stay alert." Sierra nodded, her expression tense but determined. Together, they approached the station, Rodney limping but mobile, Sierra supporting him when necessary. The main entrance was secured by a weathered security door, its control panel dark with age. Rodney examined the panel, wiping away years of accumulated dust. "Old military protocol," he muttered, inputting a series of codes from memory. To his surprise, the panel flickered to life, green indicators signaling acceptance of the code. The door slid open with a protesting screech of metal, revealing a dimly lit interior. Emergency lighting, powered by deteriorating but still functional solar cells, cast everything in a faint bluish glow. "Power's still on," Rodney observed with cautious optimism. "Means the communication systems might be operational too." They moved deeper into the station, passing through corridors littered with debris and abandoned equipment. The air was stale but breathable, filtered through ventilation systems designed to last decades without maintenance. The command center occupied the heart of the station, a circular room with workstations arranged around a central holographic display unit. Most of the equipment was covered with protective tarps, preserved against the elements by whoever had last abandoned the facility. Rodney made his way to the communications console, pulling away the tarp to reveal a complex array of controls and displays. "Let's see if this still works," he murmured, initializing the system. To his relief, the console hummed to life, displays flickering as ancient processors struggled to boot up. Sierra watched intently as Rodney worked, her hands clasped tightly around her pendant. "Can you reach help?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If the transmitter's still functional," Rodney replied, fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. "This is an old emergency channel, but there are people who still monitor it, smugglers, independent traders, former resistance members." As the system completed its startup sequence, a warning light began to flash on one of the auxiliary displays. Rodney's heart sank as he read the diagnostic report. "The primary transmitter is damaged," he explained grimly. "We're only broadcasting at about 20% power." That's not enough to reach orbit, let alone the nearest friendly outpost. Sierra's expression fell, but only momentarily. The tower, she said, pointing to a schematic on one of the displays, can be repaired? Rodney studied the schematic, considering the possibilities. Maybe. The issue seems to be a damaged power coupling. If we can bypass it or replace it. He trailed off, scanning the room for anything that might serve as a substitute. Sierra had already begun examining the equipment lockers along the wall, her movements quick and purposeful. Here, she called, opening a cabinet filled with spare parts. These look like power components. Together, they sorted through the available parts, Rodney explaining what they needed while Sierra demonstrated a surprising knowledge of electronics. When questioned, she explained that Valari technology was different, but based on similar principles. Her people had been spacefaring long before encountering humans. This could work, Rodney decided, holding up a converter that might serve as a makeshift power coupling. But someone will need to climb the tower to install it. Sierra's amber eyes met his. Your leg cannot climb. I will go. Before Rodney could protest, a new alert sounded from the console. Proximity warnings, indicating vehicles approaching rapidly from the west. Axton, Rodney muttered, checking the security feeds. The exterior cameras, though degraded, showed 3 transports converging on the station, still several minutes out, but closing fast. No time to argue, Sierra said firmly, taking the replacement part from his hands. Tell me what to do. Quickly, Rodney explained the installation procedure. Knowing she was right, with his injured leg, he couldn't make the climb, and they were out of options. Sierra listened intently, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her quick understanding of the task. Once it's installed, I'll need a few minutes to reconfigure the system and boost the signal, Rodney concluded. Can you buy me that time? Sierra nodded, her jaw set with determination. I will try. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at him. If this works, if we contact help, what then? It was a question Rodney hadn't allowed himself to consider fully. Then we get off this planet, he said. Find somewhere safe for you. Maybe find others of your kind. Something flickered in Sierra's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or the ghost of a memory. And you? What becomes of you? Rodney managed a small smile. I've been running from my past for too long. Maybe it's time I stopped running. Sierra held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned and raced toward the exterior access ladder that would take her to the communication tower. Rodney returned to the console, preparing the system for the repair while monitoring the approaching security forces. The transports were now visible on the horizon, dust clouds billowing behind them as they sped toward the station. At their current pace, they would arrive within minutes. Rodney activated the station's defensive systems, ancient but still potentially effective. Automatic turrets swiveled to life, targeting protocols engaging as they identified the approaching vehicles as hostile. It wouldn't stop Axton's forces, but it might slow them down. On the exterior camera feed, he could see Sierra climbing the tower, moving with surprising agility despite her exhaustion. She reached the transmitter housing and began the repair, following his instructions with precision. The first shots from the approaching transports struck the station's exterior, energy bolts dissipating against the reinforced walls. The defensive turrets returned fire, forcing the transports to take evasive action and slowing their advance. Sierra, Rodney called through the communication system. How's it coming? Almost done. Her voice crackled through the speakers. Connection is difficult. Parts do not match perfectly. Outside, Axton's forces had begun deploying ground troops, using the terrain for cover as they approached the station. The defensive turrets tracked them but couldn't target effectively without exposing the shooters. We've got company, Rodney warned. Hurry if you can, but be careful. Yes, Sierra's response was cut short by a sudden explosion that rocked the tower. One of the transports had targeted the communication array directly. Sierra, Rodney shouted, heart pounding as he searched the camera feeds for any sign of her. To his relief, she appeared a moment later, clinging to the tower structure, but still moving, still working on the repair. The explosion had damaged part of the platform, but missed her by inches. The console before Rodney lit up suddenly. power readings surging as the new coupling came online. "You did it," he exclaimed. "The transmitter's operational." "Good." Sierra's voice came through, strained but determined. "Send message now. I will come down." Rodney immediately began configuring the transmission, setting it to broadcast on all emergency frequencies using the station's now restored power. As he worked, the security feeds showed Axton's forces breaching the station's outer defenses, disabling the turrets one by one. "This is Rodney Vance broadcasting from Evacuation Station Echo 17 on Havers Reach," he transmitted, voice steady despite the urgency of their situation. "Requesting immediate extraction for 2. Colonial forces in pursuit. Responding vessels advised. This is a humanitarian emergency involving a Valari refugee. Authentication code Sierra Tango 937. The code, one he hadn't used in years, would identify him to former resistance contacts as someone who had fought alongside them during the Syndicate conflicts. It was a long shot, but their only chance. Message sent, he confirmed to Sierra. "Now we just need to..." The command center door exploded inward in a shower of metal and sparks. Through the smoke stepped Commander Axton, face contorted with rage, a high-powered pulse rifle cradled in his arms. "Vance," he roared. "This ends now." Rodney ducked behind the console as energy bolts sizzled overhead, impacting the equipment behind him. He reached for his sidearm, only to remember it had been taken when he was captured. "It's over, Vance," Axton called, advancing into the room, flanked by security officers. "The Valari is surrounded on the tower. Surrender now, and I might let you live long enough for a proper trial." Rodney's mind raced, seeking options that didn't exist. The console offered some protection, but he was outgunned and cornered. His leg wound had reopened during the chaos, blood soaking through the bandage. "Last chance," Axton warned, his voice closer now. "Stand up slowly." With no alternatives, Rodney began to rise, hands raised in surrender. As he did, his eyes caught movement on one of the still-functioning security feeds, Sierra, descending the tower not toward the ground, but toward a window that would give her access to the command center from above. "You know, Axton," Rodney said, raising his voice slightly to cover any sound Sierra might make. "For someone who talks about law and order, you're awfully quick to resort to violence." Axton's lip curled in contempt. "Spare me your moral superiority, Vance. You've cost this colony a valuable asset and undermined my authority. Examples must be made. Is that what this is really about?" Rodney challenged, taking a careful step to the side, drawing Axton's attention away from the overhead access panel that Sierra was now quietly opening. "Your wounded pride?" The commander's face flushed with anger. "This is about maintaining order, about showing the consequences of defiance." "No," Rodney said quietly. "This is about treating sentient beings as property, about thinking you have the right to own someone else's life." "Sentiment," Axton spat. "The babbling of idealists who've never had to make the hard choices to keep a colony alive." "And what hard choices have you made, Axton?" Rodney asked, taking another small step. "Besides deciding which luxuries to import with your bonus for capturing exotic specimens?" The commander's face contorted with rage. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Rodney's chest. "I've had enough of your..." He never finished the sentence. Sierra dropped silently from the ceiling panel directly behind him, her pendant clutched in one hand, glowing with that same eerie blue light. Before Axton could react, she pressed it against the back of his neck. The commander went rigid, a strangled cry escaping his lips as he dropped the rifle and fell to his knees. The security officers whirled in confusion, but hesitated to fire with their leader in the line of sight. That moment of hesitation was all Rodney needed. He lunged for Axton's fallen weapon, seized it, and trained it on the officers. "Drop your weapons," he commanded. "Now!" To his surprise, they complied, clearly unnerved by what they had just witnessed. Sierra stepped away from Axton, who remained on his knees, eyes wide and vacant, mouth working soundlessly. "What did you do to him?" Rodney asked, keeping the rifle trained on the officers. "Showed him truth," Sierra replied, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Showed him what it feels to be property, to be caged. She swayed slightly, the glow of her pendant dimming. Will not last long, but he will remember. Rodney quickly secured the officers, using restraints from their own equipment to bind their hands. We need to hold this position, he said to Sierra. My message might have gotten through, but it could be hours before anyone responds, if they respond at all. Sierra nodded, sinking into a chair near the console. The use of her abilities had clearly drained her severely. Her skin had lost almost all of its luminescence, and her breathing was shallow. Rest, Rodney urged, checking the exterior cameras. The remaining security forces seemed to be regrouping, uncertain how to proceed with their commander out of communication. I'll keep watch. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Axton remained in his catatonic state, occasionally making small, distressed sounds. The security officers said nothing, watching Sierra with a mixture of fear and fascination. Sierra drifted in and out of consciousness, her hand never leaving her pendant. This place, she murmured during one of her wakeful periods, feels like endings and beginnings. Let's hope it's more beginning than ending, Rodney replied, dividing his attention between the security feeds and the communication console, hoping for any sign that their message had been received. As the hours wore on, the remaining security forces outside made several half-hearted attempts to approach the station, but without clear leadership or a coordinated plan, they were easily repelled by the few remaining automated defenses. Night fell once more, the twin suns setting in a spectacular display of crimson and gold visible through the station's viewport. Rodney had just finished checking Sierra's pulse, steady but weak, when a new alert sounded from the console. Incoming transmission, he announced, hope flaring in his chest as he activated the receiver. A gruff voice filled the command center. Echo 17. This is Independent Vessel Star Chaser responding to your emergency broadcast. Authentication code confirmed. Preparing for atmospheric entry. ETA 20 minutes. Please confirm status and number of evacuees. Rodney's hands shook slightly as he keyed the response. Star Chaser, this is Rodney Vance. 2 evacuees, 1 injured. Colonial forces surrounding the station. Approach with caution. Understood, Vance, the voice replied. We've got countermeasures for the welcome committee. Hold position and prepare for extraction. Star Chaser out. Sierra's eyes had opened at the sound of the transmission. They came, she whispered, a note of wonder in her voice. They came, Rodney confirmed, a smile breaking across his face despite the exhaustion and pain. We're getting out of here. True to their word, the Star Chaser arrived with impressive efficiency. The security feeds showed a sleek, modified transport ship descending through the atmosphere, its engines flaring blue against the night sky. As it approached, it deployed a series of countermeasures, electronic jammers, and defensive drones that scattered the remaining security forces. The ship settled on the landing pad adjacent to the station, its boarding ramp extending as the engines powered down to standby mode. 3 figures emerged, armed but moving with the casual confidence of people who knew their business. Sierra, can you walk? Rodney asked, helping her to her feet. She nodded weakly. Yes, with help. Rodney turned to the bound security officers. We're leaving. What happens to Axton and the rest of you depends on what you do in the next few minutes. He tossed a small tool just within reach of one of the officers. That will help you with the restraints after we're gone. Supporting Sierra with one arm, his other hand holding Axton's confiscated rifle, Rodney made his way from the command center toward the landing pad. They encountered no resistance. The station's interior had been secured during the long hours of waiting. As they emerged onto the landing pad, the lead figure from the Star Chaser approached. A tall, broad-shouldered woman with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Vance, she greeted him, her weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. Didn't expect to find you still alive, let alone calling in old favors. Captain Thorson, Rodney replied, recognizing her as one of his mother's former colleagues. Circumstances have a way of bringing people back into the fight. Thorson's sharp eyes assessed Sierra, noting the pendant, the exhaustion, the distinctive Valari features. A survivor, she said simply, no questions, no judgment. Let's get you both aboard before colonial reinforcements arrive. The crew of the Star Chaser moved with practiced efficiency, helping Sierra into the ship while Rodney provided a brief explanation of their situation. Captain Thorson listened intently, her expression hardening at the mention of Axton's gift ceremony. Some things never change, she muttered. The colonies get further from Earth, but they bring the worst of humanity with them. Once aboard, the ship's medical officer, a quiet, competent man named Reyes, immediately attended to Sierra, providing fluids and nutrients to help her recover from the extreme energy expenditure. He examined Rodney's leg wound with equal care, applying proper medical treatment rather than the field dressing that had been sustaining him. You're lucky, Reyes commented as he worked. Another day without treatment, and you might have lost a leg. From the cockpit came the sounds of the engines powering up. Through the viewport, Rodney could see security forces regrouping at the perimeter of the station, but they were too late. The Star Chaser lifted off with a smooth surge of power, climbing rapidly into the night sky. Captain Thorson joined them in the medical bay once they had achieved a stable orbit. We've broken atmosphere and set course away from colonial space, she reported. No pursuit so far. Seems your commander, Axton, isn't in a position to coordinate a response. Where are we headed? Rodney asked, aware that they were effectively fugitives now. We've got a small outpost on Lyra's Haven, Thorson replied. Independent territory, no extradition treaties with the colonial administration. You'll be safe there while you decide your next move. She turned to Sierra, and there's a small Valari community there as well. Refugees, like yourself. Sierra's eyes widened at this news, her hand tightening around her pendant. Others? My people. About 30 in total, Thorson confirmed. They've established themselves as artisans, mostly kept to themselves, but integrated well enough with the human population. For the first time since Rodney had met her, Sierra's face relaxed into something approaching a smile. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For hope. Later, as the Star Chaser continued its journey through the star-streaked vastness of space, Rodney found Sierra in the ship's small observation lounge, gazing out at the cosmos. Her strength had begun to return, the natural luminescence of her skin gradually brightening. How are you feeling? He asked, joining her by the viewport. Better, she replied. Your Dr. Reyes is skilled. Says pendant drained too much life energy. Must rest before using abilities again. Good advice, Rodney said, though I think we're past needing those abilities for now. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars drift past. Sierra's pendant glowed softly against her chest, a gentle reminder of all they had endured. What will you do? She asked eventually. On Lyra's Haven? Rodney considered the question. For years, he had been running. From his parents' legacy, from his own failures, from the responsibilities that came with caring too much in a universe that often rewarded indifference. I'm not sure, he admitted, but I think I'd like to help others. Maybe work with refugees, people displaced by conflict or exploitation. He glanced at her. If they'll have me. Sierra turned to face him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. They will, she said with certainty. You have good heart. Valari sense such things. And you? Rodney asked, what will you do now that you're free? Sierra looked back to the stars, her expression thoughtful. Find my people. Learn their stories. Share mine. She touched her pendant gently. Keep memories alive. Then, perhaps help others, like you did for me. Impulsively, she reached out and took his hand in hers, her fingers cool and smooth against his calloused palm. You saved more than my life, she said softly. Save my hope. My future. Rodney felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. We saved each other, he replied. They remained that way for a long time, hand in hand, watching the stars blur past as the Star Chaser carried them toward a new beginning on Lyra's Haven. There would be challenges ahead, adaptation to a new world, the ever-present threat of the colonial administration's long reach, the process of healing from their respective traumas. But in that moment, standing together in the quiet of the observation lounge, surrounded by the vastness of space and the promise of tomorrow, both Rodney and Sierra knew one certainty. They were no longer alone. And when Sierra turned to him, enfolding him in an embrace that spoke of gratitude, friendship, and perhaps something more, Rodney felt the last pieces of his fractured spirit finally begin to mend. He had freed her from a cage, but she had freed him from a prison of his own making, one built of guilt, regret, and isolation. Together, they had found something precious amid the harsh reality of Haver's reach, the courage to believe in a better future. As the Star Chaser journeyed onward through the star-filled darkness, carrying its passengers toward new horizons, that courage burned bright between them, a beacon of hope in a universe that desperately needed it.